for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. Today is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we're wrapping up the week. Tonight, it's a short week with Richard Dolan. Richard is with us. And a great week on the show. Monday, we did an AMA. That was always fun. Last night, live in the studio, Amy Christine was here. Psychic medium live in the studio in my haunted house. That was pretty cool. And then we, Romeo and Amy and I went out to dinner last night after that. It was a lot of fun. Tonight, Richard Dolan is here. And public service announcement tomorrow and for the next week, we are off air because tomorrow I head to Alaska and Canada. So I'm going to go see me some whales. I'm going to take I'm going to also ride the Kodiak Express, man, through the mountains up there too as well. Great train ride. And so I'll be back next week, but taking a little working vacation and heading to the Great White North. And I'll say this, I mean this, you know, you think about Europe or Africa, right? You think about these places. Will I ever go to England? Will I get to the United Kingdom? You know, and Alaska is one of those things where I think everybody in the back of their mind, I would like to go, but I probably will never make it up there, you know, and it's right there. This is a bucket list thing. And I cannot wait for this. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'll be live streaming and doing things with everybody throughout the week. So you'll be able to get your Jimmy fix on if you so desire. All right. So that kicks off tomorrow. Tonight, Richard Dolan is here. And now I've framed the show tonight. Okay. All right. Normally I would say this when Richard is on the air, but I'm going to say it before I bring Richard on. I wish everybody could have heard Richard and I just talking in the pre-interview because it was friggin' amazing. And he goes, so, dude, what are we going to talk about? I said, do we ever have a plan? No, that's the great thing about doing the show. And he's exactly right. And that's why everybody is so excited about the nights that Richard is on, because it is just going to be an open, frank conversation between friends. And I framed this show, I've called it the latest UFO UAP updates, just because we've done so many shows together and so many topics over the years. Just throw something up there. Richard and I are just going to, wind us up, let us go, and we'll see where everything falls. He did do a review of Lue Elizondo's book. A little transparency here for everybody. And I just told Richard this so he knows in advance. A, I haven't read Elizondo's book. And B, I haven't watched Richard's review. At least all of it. We'll do all of that and much more tonight. He is one of the leading researchers and writers on the subject of UFOs. He completed his graduate work at the University of Rochester, where he studied U.S. Cold War strategy, European history, and international diplomacy. He is the author of UFOs and the National Security State, co-authored with Bryce Zabel. Of course, there is UFOs in the National Security State, volumes 1 and 2, and everything else. Also, many, over a decade ago, Richard and I did Hangar One, the UFO files together. And I saw that last week and I went, Richard and I did that. That's right. We did do that. So much more. RichardDolanMembers.com is the website. You can also chase down his YouTube channel. We'll be talking about that and everything else. Got to welcome back to Faded Black, the one and only Richard Dolan. Richard bleeping Dolan. He's right there.
Hello,
How you
Jimmy.
doing? How you doing, man?
Very well. Happy to be here. Always glad to chat with you.
It's always great. It's always great. I think you'll agree with me when I say that pre-interview today was pretty epic. That's one of the people should have heard that. That was. Can I tell everybody?
It's typical for us.
Yeah, very typical. Very
Actually,
typical. But this one was different. Let me tell everybody what happened very briefly. So sound check is always at 6:30. And I come into the studio, I sit down, Richard's already here, but he's not on the screen. And I hear, and I'm doing stuff in the studio, but I hear Richard, don't say anything, Richard. I hear Richard talking in the background, right? And I hear a female voice. So I think it's Richard and Tracy. And then so I'm like, what are they talking about? So I put on the headphones and I'm listening to this conversation. I'm like, is he on a Zoom call with a physicist? And I'm like listening really close. I'm like, this is freaky shit, man. Who are they talking to? So I sat there for like 5 minutes and then it went silent and I hit the microphone and go, Richard, I'm here. And then it shuts off. I thought you ended your Zoom call. I go, dude, what the hell was that? And Richard said, go ahead, Richard.
We're watching Fringe.
Oh,
what a great show.
What a great show.
This is Tracy's fourth go around with it. It's only my second.
Such a great show.
I love Fringe.
So Tracy, in my mind's eye, right, was Anna Torv.
Yeah.
I thought Tracy, and you guys were doing like a Zoom call from somebody from Europe and this deep talk about science. And I was listening really close and I was like, man, Richard, that was a good question too. Well, Tracy is on her game and it was Fringe.
So we're 3 hours ahead of you. So here, it was like 9:30. I worked all day long. I worked all day long, all morning, all afternoon. I'm working on my book. I'll be happy to talk about that later. And I was tired, so we just did some dinner, had some stew, which we made homemade. It was delicious. And we were like, we're going through Fringe. So we were on an episode and just had some stew, we're hanging out. I was looking at the clock, thinking I'm going to be on with you in a little while. But that was our wind down time. And I always must have it at night.
Man, I got to tell you, I didn't know. And I was listening and I was in a serious WTF moment, man. I was like, who is on the Zoom call?
That is such a great show. It's such a great show.
Okay, so before we get started, let's just get it out of the way. What was the last song you listened to today, Richard?
Yes, I can thank my wife for this. She put it on. Amy Winehouse, Valerie.
Whoa.
Isn't that a great song?
Whoa. Man, she was a gift from God.
Totally. First time I ever heard her, well over 20 years ago, it was when her first album had come out. And she was so young. And I remembered when I listened to it, it was the first pop music that made me feel old. Because I was like, this young genius singer, like I could just feel like she was culturally, intellectually, in all these ways, in a place that I had never gone. Like in her manner,
you may never get to. Yeah, you may never get to that.
That's right. But she did that. I was so blown away by her talent and by her like stripped down honesty in her lyrics.
One of the terms. One of the things that's thrown around too much, and I almost get physically ill when I hear it now, but it's this. She's such an old soul. He's so young, but he has such an old soul. You know what? Save that, right? But in the case of Amy Winehouse, that's when you say it. That's when you say it. She was already formed and developed and sang with this passion, and you could feel her pain, and
She
people,
had
and
so much trouble. I mean,
yeah,
she really had a rough time, and she had a lot of psychological issues going on, which you get with a lot of great artists. I mean, unfortunately, that's what happens. And she
that's
was
it.
one of the greatest.
I've watched all the documentaries. I've seen a couple of the concerts, and when she was alive, my mind was blown. And then,
Oh yeah.
with the way that she went out, there's a couple of things
Mm-hmm.
that you say to yourself, well, that's rock and roll. If you're gonna,
Yeah.
and I don't say that in jest. I say that like for real. She had real demons, but people related to that because it came out of her when she performed. Not the demons, but her passion, her emotions.
Yeah. No,
All
it's
of
true.
that was honest and real, man.
A lot of people don't fully realize, like, you understand to some extent. I understand to some extent, because if you're a public person, you can appreciate some of that. I mean, where Amy Winehouse was at was, like times 1 million for me. But it's not impossible for me to appreciate the stress and the difficulties that a famous person would have when you are expected to perform, you are expected to be great, and millions of eyes are looking at you, and then like you're traveling all the time as she would do, and it's a lonely life. It's actually very lonely for most of those people, and that's why they often turn to drugs or alcohol or other unhealthy outlets, because they're alone. They miss their family, they miss their people, and then they get into the trap of the excitement, and everything's like, I need a new thrill, and you just go down the road of addiction, all kinds of different addictions. And it's all too common, unfortunately, and the culture creates that, and she was a victim of it, due to her unbelievable God-given talent.
And you don't have people around you to say no. That's the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
thing. You've got too many people. You got too many enablers and hangers on and everything else, and
yeah. They'll want the money.
nobody's there to say no and check yourself, and that's not present.
Yeah.
And so anyway, great. So me, it was REO Speedwagon, and I was
Picking out the
pulling.
T-shirt. The
Yeah, I
sweatshirt.
was pulling it. I was pulling in right before the show, and Riding the Storm Out, the live version, came on my playlist, and I just rocked it, man. Just cranked, and I just thought, man, I forgot, man, how great, And now there's the old REO. They were a rock and roll band. Then you had that FM Love Story, adult contemporary version of REO, which I have great respect for too. But that old stuff with Gary Richrath and the original guitar player. So I pulled in the driveway and I listened to the end of the song and went, wow. Right. And I came in, I went, Dolan's on tonight. So I ran upstairs and grabbed this shirt. So, okay. So I know that you heard me say at the beginning of the show, let's get straight to it.
Yeah.
You did a review of Lue Elizondo's book.
Mhm.
And now I told you that the link was sent to me. I started to watch it. And you said at the beginning of the review, now I'm going to paraphrase, don't interrupt. You're going to want to correct me. But so I'm just paraphrasing, Richard. Okay. But you said something like, this may be the greatest book on the subject since Ruppelt's Flying Saucers of 1956. And I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying, and you used your hands, you go, they're just about equal. And then you said, and I'm going to tell you why. And I went, stop. I stopped it right there because I knew you were coming on the show. And I did not want, to be preloaded on your thoughts. And then, but now I'm going to say this, between when I hit pause or hit stop, right? And I went to the kitchen to get some coffee, between my studio in the kitchen, I rattled off like, what's he talking about? What about Jacques Vallée, Passer to Magnolia?
Well, that's because you didn't
Well,
listen carefully to what I said.
Yeah, but hold on, let me just finish. So that's what I did. I went, what about Communion? What about Fire in the Sky? What about Strange Harvest? What about his own books, UFOs Volume 1 and 2, AD after disclosure? What about Avi Loeb's Extraterrestrial? What about and I did that by the time I got to the coffee machine. So let's back up now, okay? Knowing that, right? Now I've just laid it out there. That was your overarching opening statement. What's the reason for the statement? And for you, where you're I look at you as being very pragmatic and facts driven, data driven, and a historian. And but the book, did you pull your version of data out of the book for you to give it that lofty position?
Well, first of all, I did not say it was the greatest book since Ruppelt's 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. I did not say that. What I did say was that it can be compared very, very appropriately to Ruppelt's book, and that you could say it was the first genuine inside high-level government analysts of UFO subject to write about this since Ruppelt. So Ruppelt, who had run Project Blue Book back in the 1950s, was in a lot of ways analogous to Lue Elizondo, very much so. He was an inside guy. He ran a UFO program that was a U.S. government UFO program. And also, like Elizondo, wrote a book that in many ways flew in the face of the standard American government statements on the flying saucers at that time. The government back in the 50s was like, there's nothing to this, it's hoaxes, hallucinations, etc. Ruppelt writes this book in 1956 saying, no, as a matter of fact, we had some cases that were unbelievable. Let me tell you about them. And he essentially blew the Air Force and the government's position out of the water with that very important book. Since Ruppelt, there has not been any comparable government official to have anything like that whatsoever in print form. So until Elizondo is very much comparable to Ruppelt. Is it the greatest book? No, I definitely would not say it's the greatest book. I wouldn't say Ruppelt's is the greatest book, although they're both very important books. Very important books. Elizondo's book, I did in my video, I said I think they're roughly equal, but in fact, I think Elizondo's book is more significant in many ways than even Ruppelt's, and that's saying something, because Ruppelt's book really is a great book, but so is Elizondo's. It's very important. You consider just one thing about what Elizondo says in this book, and not just in his book, but he said this in public statements many times. As a G-15 high-level U.S. government employee with extensive security clearances that he's talked about, he is saying not just that UFO or UAP are real. Other people are saying that. Chris Mellon saying that, and a number of other people are saying it. But Lou's really putting it out there and saying they're not us. They're not from our civilization. He's not really using the word alien, but that's really what he's saying. He's saying they are extraterrestrial. They're not from here. We are not the alpha species. He uses that phrase. We're not the top species even here on this planet. And you would have to, I don't know where you would be able to find another government official of comparable stature who has been willing to put his ass on the line to make that type of statement. Even Chris Mellon, who I think has been very direct. I don't know that we could say his statements have been quite as blunt and candid as Elizondo. So I think that's a very important thing right there. Just, full stop. But he has a lot more to say than simply that. I will want to mention, because a lot of people are very triggered by something he's been saying since 2017, which is talking about this phenomenon as a potential threat, not just to national security, but existentially to humanity. He has said this. And, it is just the norm to hear people really getting very upset when they hear him talk like this. They don't like it. Some people will interpret this as him basically just carrying water for the military industrial complex, which, my attitude is there's a lot of things that Lue says that I do not agree with, whether that's politically or even necessarily everything about this phenomenon. I don't know that I agree with everything that he says. But when he talks about this as a potential threat, there's no way that I can disagree with that. I look back at my own 2 volumes of history of UFOs in the national security state and everything else that I've researched. And, one of the most important things that I initially saw was one violation of airspace after another by these objects going over sensitive U.S. military airspace, over sensitive Soviet, Russian military airspace, over anywhere they want to go. And they have been treated as potential threats by the militaries of the world. Now, there are people who don't think that that's a problem, and they're entitled to think that. But Lue Elizondo is a soldier. The guy, we pay him, he literally gets paid to protect the country. That is his job. If a guy like that is not thinking about national security, then there's something wrong with them. So you have to, it's disingenuous to get angry at someone because they're worried about a threat, because that's their job. That's his job. So I can't fault him for that. We can look over the whole threat possibilities, and we can agree or disagree with those. But I think it's rather unfair, frankly, to criticize a military person for saying this is a potential threat, when in fact, it actually is a potential threat. I think to deny that it's at least a potential threat, to me, seems very naive and very foolish. So that's one thing he gets into. There's a lot of other things we can get into.
We'll get into all of that. We'll get into all of that. Let me ask you this. Like I said, I look at you as a facts-driven person. And before the book's release, what I had said on the air is, because I read all the pages that were leaked, right? I did read those. And what I had said was this.
It's a good read. It's a good read.
I said, there are very bright people out there on both sides of the fence. There's supporters and there's haters out there, smart on both sides, that are going to seize on points on this book and debate it out. And I'm going to enjoy that because they really know how to get down into it and get the facts and everything. And so I had said that. And as it turns out, there wasn't anything. The debates that are going on about the book right now are more opinions or more philosophical debates going on out there. But there wasn't names, dates, a case that we haven't heard of, something that
I don't think people are careful readers. I've become convinced people pretend all kinds of things they don't actually do, including read books.
Okay, so what stood out for you?
Well, he talks about, all right, one important thing, the inside machinations dealing with ATIP and OSAP. So this is very important. He talks about being brought on to the OSAP program, which before it became ATIP, in, I think, 2009. Jay Stratton, James Lukatsky bring him on board. And he talks about how after a very initial, what seemed like a brief honeymoon period, when the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, did seem to support this program, that they were like the outcasts within the Pentagon. And actually, I wondered if it had to do with the change of administrations, because the Obama administration comes into power in January 2009. And it seemed to me shortly after that things changed. And he didn't get into that, and I would like to ask him. But what he points out is that there were 2 fundamental groups that were out to get the ATIP and the OSAP programs, to basically destroy them. He described them both. One he called, the legacy program. So the old UFO program that worked with all the contractors, Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, and the like. They were not happy, he said, with this new organization, basically just nosing around. And in fact, really, the way he describes it, it's like Stratton and Lukatsky were into the Skinwalker Ranch. That was like an absolute obsession. And they wanted to know what makes this thing go, which is why they brought Bigelow on, because like this Bigelow obviously was the owner of it at the time. And so that OSAP particularly was essentially a continuation of NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Science, which Robert Bigelow ran for years in the 90s and in the 2000s. So it was an attempt to get into that. That made the program vulnerable, though, from within the Pentagon. You know, this is still the global war on terror. George W. Bush is still president. And they're looking at what? Ghosts and paranormals and wormholes and portals and all of that. So it was very difficult for them to defend that against enemies within the Pentagon. But also the legacy program was not happy. And then somehow the decision was made, and I think Lue seemed to be part of this decision, to say, look, we need to just focus a little bit specifically on these UAP, these UFOs, because they're tangible. We can argue, we can defend it as a matter of national security much more easily. This is a potential threat. This is another reason why I think they talk about the threat. You're in the Pentagon. You've got to defend the program from those who want to take it down. What better way than to say this is a potential threat? So the ATIP program was really targeted for that purpose. But again, the legacy programs were not happy about any of this. And then the other enemy he pointed out was something that Nick Redfern had written about years ago, the so-called Collins elite. Mm-hmm. And I remember when Nick wrote that book a few years ago, I was unsure what I really thought. Like, that seems a little out there. Bunch of religious fundamentalists, conservative Christians within the Pentagon who looked at all of this type of activity as demonic, and therefore, like, either like we must oppose it or just do not engage it, do not study it. And Lue talked quite a bit about this. He said, at first I thought that was all nonsense, but it wasn't. He said, a lot of my former coworkers and one former supervisor, he said, was a member, and he talked about a conversation that his supervisor had with him, and said, look, I know what you're into. We've got it all figured out. You really should let this go because it's all demonic. And, you know, Lue described his response, which was like, look, I don't think he said this to the guy, but the fact that they let their religious opinions, this is his take on it, dictate national security policy was something he didn't agree with. So I thought that was interesting. He had a couple of other interesting things to say about the Nimitz encounter. It's some new information for me. The Roosevelt encounters, the USS Roosevelt on the East Coast, there was a lot that was new there. Just to give you one example, he talked about something called Op Plan Interloper. Op Plan Interloper. I'd never heard of this. And he described it as basically a plan to lure these UAP out of hiding using a nuclear armed Navy ships. He says, look, we knew that they liked two things, water and nukes. And he said, we had a plan. And they had CIA working with this, according to what he wrote. Some other, maybe NSA, I can't remember, some other three-letter agencies. This is a collaborative effort to have nuclear, this is insane, nuclear armed Navy ships out in the Atlantic Ocean with the hopes that they would draw these UAP out and to then be able to record them.
Use the Nimitz as bait.
Yeah, well, this isn't the Nimitz because that's on the West Coast. So
the Roosevelt. Use a naval ship, a nuclear ship as bait. Yeah.
And what he said is that's how they got the gimbal video of 2015. And some other video as well, which we don't know about. But he talked about the gimbal video as essentially one result of this Op Plan Interloper. It was kind of amazing. It was really a shocking thing, at least for my reading of it. And then he had a lot to say about Dr. Hal Puthoff, someone I've known for over 20 years. Had a lot of conversations about Hal Puthoff actually figures very heavily in this book in many places, and very, very fascinating. But to me, a couple of the most interesting things, he mentioned that Hal Puthoff said to him point blank that Roswell was real and they had recovered bodies. It's very important because Hal Puthoff publicly has really not ever said that. There is a private memo that he wrote that has been circulating, stated early 1990s. I have a copy. Other people have a copy, where Hal Puthoff does talk openly about the Roswell crash. He obviously knows it happened, but he's not gone out in public to say this. But in Lue's book, Hal Puthoff does talk very, very bluntly to him about the fact that Roswell was real, alien crash, alien bodies, and so forth. But even more interesting was he mentioned a lecture Hal Puthoff gave at a SCIF. He didn't give a date, but I'm thinking around 2014, 2015 period, where he laid out essentially his theory of, I'm just going to call it space-time metric engineering. He may have called it something different, by which he said, all of the 5 or 6 observables that you're talking about that these UAP do, sudden acceleration, anti-gravity or positive lift, transmedium capability, low observability, all of these other things. He said, I believe that they can all be explained through essentially space-time manipulation. And Lue, I'll say this about Lue, he tries to portray himself as no great intellect. That is absolutely not true. He's clearly a highly intelligent man who's got very good science training. And he does a very nice job of explaining how Hal Puthoff explained his theory. And, for each one of those observables, like, why is there low observability? Well, because if you've got a space-time bubble essentially around this craft, it is going to manipulate light in certain ways that you are very likely not going to be able to observe it quite accurately or quite right. And that goes the same with electronic things like radar and other things. They're not going to behave properly when they're being interfered with by a space-time membrane, as it were. So all of that, I think, was quite interesting. And then the last thing I guess I'll just say, and I'll leave this here for you, is essentially the attacks on the ATIP and OSAP program, which essentially Lue portrays as, I don't want to say he's portraying them as disclosure venues or disclosure efforts, but in a way you really can kind of see it that way, because it becomes obvious that the ATIP and OSAP programs, I mean, it's not like they had a lot of money. They didn't. They were a very small group of dedicated people who were trying to figure this thing out. That's really what they were. And everyone was trying to take them down. In fact, it's funny. I told you we're watching Fringe before I came on here with you. That's actually the story of Fringe. You got this Fringe division. These people, they're studying. They're within the FBI. They're trying to figure it out.
In the basement.
And other groups are trying to take them down. But in a sense, that actually was kind of how Lue portrayed ATIP and OSAP. Now, one can argue this is one man's perspective. There may be other ways of looking at it. I'm sure that is true. But nonetheless, his perspective is valuable. His perspective is important. He was there, and he's entitled to give his perspective, and we ought to know what it is. So his position is that these programs, like, they were trying to figure this out. They were trying to give this a really good, honest effort to get in there within a totally hostile environment within the Pentagon, which, by the way, is still totally hostile to him. I mean, let's face it, they do nothing but smear him left and right. That you don't have to be a supporter or attacker of him to notice this. They have constantly gone after him, and that has continued, I would say, to this day. But it was definitely the case when those programs were active. It was very interesting stuff.
Yeah. I've always thought about this. We've got Jay Stratton and Lukatsky, and we've got a couple of other names that have been thrown in the hat, but really it's a very small group. And it's always sounded to me that when Elizondo was in ATIP, that it may have been a group of one. When it was ATIP, not OSAP, but ATIP. was Lue working by himself? Because I have never heard him say, and does he mention in the book? Well, also on a tip with me was blah 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 blah.
There's a
And
couple of other names mentioned. Some of them are redacted. Some of them are given pseudonyms, so you don't really know who some of
right,
these people are. But I also got that impression that we're talking a very small group. And
right.
it kind of makes sense. It's like, where is the money for this? Like, where
Well,
is this really coming from?
that's another thing. So if you're a Pentagon, if you're a Department of Defense employee, and you get your paycheck. You said G-15 earlier. That's a civilian working for the government. That's a G-15
Right.
position.
Yeah.
But if you're working for the Department of Defense and you get your paycheck from the Army Finance Center at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, right? They cut the paychecks for everybody in the military, all branches, right? Comes out of that the Finance Center. You get your paycheck. Do you get an ATIP bonus? Is there, or are you working for free? Is it itemized down there? You know, all of your extra work that you're doing and this on the side and your overtime is ATIP, or was that a freebie? And he wasn't getting bonused and wasn't getting paid. Was that ever addressed in the book? I'm very curious about that.
Some people really want to bring this up because I think they just want to say he never worked for ATIP. You've been hearing the Pentagon say this for years.
But you know what I'm saying, though? When you're a government employee, you
Right.
nitpick every dime you can get out of the government. That's it.
Wow.
And that's part of your job.
He talked about how they were robbed of $10 million on one occasion. They got $10 million granted. They were like, yippee, let's, and he said another agency within the Pentagon saw that money before they were able to get to it and stole it.
What were they spending the money on, by the way?
Well, he didn't do a line item in the book, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, you have a budget. What are you spending the money? These are me.
They were.
You're pragmatic. You know where I'm going. With this.
Yeah. I mean, look. It had to be a small operation,
right?
It had to be a tiny operation. We're talking $22 million, as far as we can say, total over a period of several years. That gets you, coffee at the Pentagon, basically. It's really not much money. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've wondered this as well, but what came through to me is that, first of all, they did, he talked about Stratton's analysis of the Nimitz encounter. So that was all through part of that. And then, of course, they did a fairly detailed study of the Roosevelt encounters as well, which, by the way, he had some new information about that too. We can get into that, I suppose, at some point. So they were doing investigations of various cases, and he made it clear that they were looking into some other cases that he didn't necessarily elaborate in the book, at least to my recollection. I could be wrong. I think I gave the book one careful read through, and I did read it carefully, but that doesn't mean that I'm remembering everything.
Yeah, and so I'm going to go back. I'm going to re-ask my question now that you've got your mind going. I'm going to re-ask it again. As far as cases go, not programs and stuff, but as far as did you're that's what you do, man. You're looking at cases all day long,
right?
That's what you do. Was there a case that was mentioned in there, a specific incident that you didn't know about?
I think so. Well, I don't know. No, I wouldn't say, like, in terms of UFO, UAP cases. He talked about alien implants. He actually had information. He talked a lot about was Kit Green's study. He didn't use Kit Green by name. He had a pseudonym for him, I think Williams, something like that. Everyone else gets a name, but Kit Green gets a pseudonym.
He called him Cat Williams.
Did not want his name in the book.
Cat Williams.
But he's clearly it's about him, and he talked about the study to analyze people who have had the close encounter experiences with these UAP. He did actually have a few things to say about them, and I'm wishing I could remember some of them off the top of my head, but One thing is that a lot of these people had Native American genetic ancestry, specifically Cherokee, which caught me a little bit off guard, but that was interesting. I've heard that from time to time in the past. He did definitely say that, or I'm trying to recall that he implied these encounters did leave a kind of genetic mark, or I don't want to quote him out of context. The impression I got is that the studies showed that experiencers were being affected in some biological way, and often in a negative biological way by their encounters. I mean, many of us know about U.S. Airman John Burroughs, someone I've spoken to many times, and John, I think it's fair to say, nearly died of heart problems, probably as a result of his encounter in the Rendlesham Forest in 1980. And thank goodness they were able to get him help. And that's not covered in the book, but he does talk about negative biological effects of encounters. The one thing I wanted to mention were implants, where he actually talked quite a bit about studies of these alien implants. And I wasn't sure if he was really referring specifically and solely to the work of Roger Lear, who's no longer with us, of course. Roger did a lot with implant removal, of course. I got the impression it was beyond what Roger Lear did. But he said, we were doing studies of these things, and he said the implants almost acted like they were alive, and that they would move subcutaneously, that is below your skin, but without causing tissue damage, which, you think about a thing that's moving around inside your body, it's going to damage your tissue. But he said these things never seemed to do that. And that they seemed like they were alive, even after they were removed from the person and put in a petri dish, they seemed like they were alive for a short period of time. It's quite interesting.
Yeah,
a lot of interesting things in there. It's a good book.
Am I wrong in saying that it sounds like there's a little something for everybody in the book?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
He hit on orbs, right? Orbs?
Oh, yes, he does. He did talk quite a bit about orbs. In fact, he said that his own family began encountering orbs. And he had information on orbs that I was not familiar with. He talked about different color orbs and stated, and I don't know how he had this information, but that blue orbs were actually dangerous. And of all of the orbs that people encountered, you definitely wanted to avoid the blue ones. I didn't get a sense that the other colors were quite as dangerous. That's interesting. In my own research, I don't come across blue orbs very frequently at all. I have to honestly say the vast number of them are either orange yellow, or reddish orange yellow, but orange, or like white.
Yeah, white.
A lot of white. So I've not really encountered many cases of blue orbs, but he seemed to have done so. It was very interesting.
Now, I didn't want to do the whole show on Lue's book, but I have one other comment,
Sure.
one other question, I should say. I have watched intentionally certain conversations across all the social media platforms about the book, and watch. I just want to know what people are thinking and what they're talking about. And I did this AMA on Monday, and I love doing those, and I know you do too. They're great. And so the question that just kept coming up, and in my email, right? What about trust? What about trust? Can we trust what is in this book? Can we trust Lue? And before you answer that question, because I know that you're getting the same questions and you've got an answer for that, my answer is what Lue would say, which is no, don't trust me. Don't. You do your own thing. I can only do my part, but no, don't believe. No, just don't. And the other side of that is Lue's job over the years as a career is to lie You're in a foreign country or wherever, and you strike up a conversation with Lue in a restaurant, everything out of his mouth, he's not telling you the truth about it, who he is
Well, that's a
or
bit
what he's doing.
simplistic.
But what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
that he has that ability as career training. So he will tell you that. He's got to be honest with that. It's in his CV.
Right.
So that's the part that I think everybody understands. You know, Guantanamo, and everybody understands ATIP, and everybody understands Nimitz. The government agent. They see all of that, and they understand that. So it's an honest question.
Right. Well, yes. So I would agree. Like, you don't know and just trust anything automatically. And I tell this to people about myself. People say, "Why should I trust you?" And I always say, "Never trust me."
Right.
But what I try to do is provide you with the sources that I use to acquire my information, so that you can then examine it yourself. All that I do, I'm not better than anyone who ever reads my books, and I never ever try to put myself above them by saying trust me. That is the worst policy. The proper policy is you provide citations for your work so that other people who care can look at those same things that I use for my research, and they can make their own judgment whether I did a good job or not. And that's really all that you can ever do. That's the point. You have to trust your ability to review my sources. That's what I would say. Do that. But also, I would say the other side of it is it's not really helpful to have a knee-jerk, that's BS type of response as well, which a lot of people will do.
Right.
They'll be like, "Oh, it's obviously all lies," and I mean that's ridiculous. That's stupid, honestly. But yeah, there are people who act like that also. I think that's certainly not helpful. To say that Lue lies all the time, that's obviously wrong. It's obviously wrong. No one could survive in this world if you lied pathologically 100% of the time. And you know, he's in the capacity now, not as an intelligence officer, but as a public person who has a public reputation. And people have to remember,
that's my counter to that
in
my own statement. That's my counter. It's like, well, okay, so we know his career, we understand that, but now we're talking about a book that has been published. So now we're in a different position here.
Yeah, he's put himself out on the line here.
Yeah,
and he knows, like, he's in a den of vipers, in the Pentagon and in the public too. There's a lot of people who are out to get him. He's well aware. He cannot not be aware of that. So I treat his book like I would treat any book, which is opinions. You know, like his opinions about this or that are of secondary importance to me. What I'm interested in, what makes any book valuable to me, is can I get a lot of factual or checkable information out of it? And the answer in this book is yes. There's a lot. There's a lot of specific claims and statements that he makes about the ATIP and OSAP programs, which are historically significant, and we need to know that. And so we want his positions on them. And that doesn't have to be the final word. Of course not. He's just one man, but it's an important perspective. You want to know it. And he provides that. He provided a lot of information, not comprehensive, not complete, but he provided a lot of information about things that happened in those programs that we didn't know before. By the way, he mentioned something. He did not mention Kona Blue by name, but it was very obvious to me when I read this book that he really talks about why Kona Blue almost happened. And this is 2012. And I mention this because you and I have talked about Kona Blue on one of your programs.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, what's up with that? What happened with Kona Blue? They're taking it out of the DIA, moving it to Homeland Security. What's going on with all of that? He actually gets into that. And it was very interesting. He said the funding, we knew the funding was going to run out. We knew that we were basically persona non grata within the DIA. We had too many enemies. This was not going to get reviewed. And what he said was, my own clearances and my own status was now sufficient for me to be the protector of a new program. It would be under my domain, as it were. and we just needed a proper home for it. And so they were trying to shop it around to different places that were not called the Defense Intelligence Agency so that they could run it. And again, he did not mention Kona Blue by name, but as I was reading that, it seemed pretty obvious to me that that's what he was talking about. So really, Kona Blue was kind of like a desperate Hail Mary pass, like, how are we going to save this program? Let's try. One thing that is not clear to me, that was never clear to me when I was reading the book, is after 2012, when the original funding seemed to run out, because that was the whole OSAP mandate was 2008 to 2012. How did they actually function after that? They clearly were functioning. Were they functioning in a truly formal official capacity, or were they their own invisible college within the Pentagon? They were clearly doing work, and they were clearly collaborating with other groups and agencies. He talked about, the op plan earlier, where they were trying to lure the UFOs, the UAP.
Interloper.
Yeah, thank you. So they were clearly engaged in doing things, but specifically in what kind of Pentagon jurisdiction, bureaucracy they were working in, it's not 100% clear to me. I will say that. So that will require, I think, further kind of fleshing out.
Well,
but
it's one of the best points that I wish it was addressed in the book too as well. I mentioned it earlier. You're bringing it up again, and it's this: how big was it, or was it just a group of one or one and a half? Was it just Lue? And were you paid for your time? And if you weren't paid for your time, and the budget is run out, the offset money's out, there's no money in the kitty, then really what is actually going on there? And that's how to keep the program running without funding and keep everybody's interest in it.
Well, he had something going on there. And, for him, his motivation, at least this is what he would say. And it's kind of weird for me to be talking for Lue Elizondo, because I'm not Lue Elizondo. And we really should do this with him here, obviously. But I'll just say this one final thing, which is that his attitude seems to be, I discovered this was a real problem. This was a real thing. These UFOs were real. They were not being taken seriously anywhere nearly the way they should be by every channel that I encountered within the Pentagon. And he basically makes it his mission to keep this alive and to keep the study of this going, to contact General James Mattis, who was, somebody he was close to, all of these things. Like, for him, you get the feeling like he was on a mission. He wanted to keep this alive. He was working on behalf of having the military genuinely study the UFO phenomenon. That is literally how it comes across.
We'll wrap this, and then you know what? I was going to go to a commercial. Screw the commercial. Let's just go straight through. You want to go straight through?
Happy to.
Okay. Screw it. That means I'm going to have to smoke some weed and do some shots that I normally do on the break. Are you okay with that?
I'm perfectly fine with that.
Chilled vodka shots.
You're going to watch your transformation.
Yeah, a couple of bong rips. Yeah, well, see, now you know when I come back off of the break. Okay, hey, you hippie kids. Now for the second half of the show. How you doing, Richard?
Have I ever told you kids about the 60s?
Yeah, exactly. A strange thing. Now we're going to segue off of the book. And I will read it at some point. If the publisher gets off their butt and sends it to me, I'll read it faster. I'm not interested in the audio book. I want the physical book in my hand. You know what I just got? Walter Cruttenden, right? The great Walter Cruttenden. Love that guy. He's on the show last week, and he mentions to me because you know what he's about, binary star systems and the golden age and the golden.
I don't really know his work, so
yeah, and he's a great researcher, the Binary Institute, and he runs the CPAC conference up in Northern California. And but anyway, great conference. And but astronomy, is and the physics side of star systems. He's amazing. But he says to me, he goes, Jimmy, man, I get a lot of my information from a book written in 1894. It's called, and I have it. I ordered it. It's called, it's called, the something science.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah, the something. No. What was it called? Okay, everybody in the chat, tell me what was the name of that book. Oh, you know what? Hold on, man. I'll just look it up. Yeah, no, it was delivered to me today. So let me go to my orders, and it was called The Holy Science. The Holy Science. Yeah. And and he's talking about written by Swami Sri Yukeswar.
Wow.
Yeah, 1894, man. 1894. Written in the year 1894 at the request of the great Indian sage Mahavatar Babaji. Yeah. So anyway, so that book, I order books. I'll pay for books gladly. But this case, I'll get around to it. I'm going to let everybody else continue to debate. And like I said, it seems very, very, the debate going on is it's opinions. That's what's going on. It's not like people are arguing about names and dates and job classifications and
the story of our time.
Yeah. It's really weird, man. It's moved on to another level.
The
okay.
best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity.
Wow.
William Butler Yeats.
Wow.
Who
is that? David Hume?
Yates. The great
okay.
poet.
Yeah, great.
Whom I named my cat after.
Not you named him after Bill?
I have a cat. I have a female cat named after a boy poet. There you go. Yates F. Dolan.
Oh, Yates.
But anyway, William Butler Yeats wrote, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity."
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so let me tell you what happened 2 weeks ago, and I got to get your opinion on this because I'm sure that you saw it. Okay, but you saw the videos. Okay, so it was a Monday night. I believe it was Monday night after the show. And the meteor showers were happening that night. It was the peak of the meteor shower. So it's after the show and 2 weeks ago. And I go out on my upstairs back patio and I've got my night vision. I've got my binoculars. I got my chair, and a drink with ice in it. And I put that down and I sit to watch the meteor shower. And now I'm looking directly over Lockheed Skunk Works. It's in front of me, right? Now I'm on the second floor. And that's about a mile away. And so I'm watching meteors, man. It's cool. Man, it's such an amazing thing to just sit there and see. And this bright yellow, long, thick one went across the sky. And as it did that, I'm looking up and I see this object in the sky. And I had seen the object already, but I was busy watching meteors, right? But I went, man, okay. And it just caught my eye and it was white and low and like right over my house, just right here, a few thousand feet, couple thousand feet low. And it stopped and it backtracked on itself. Now you got my attention, right? I'm like, okay. But it was white. There wasn't any blue or red or green lights or anything. It was flashing white. and which was interesting. Anyway, so it backtracked on itself. So I thought, oh, helicopter. But I don't hear anything. And it's right there. And so I watch it go back, and it stayed in this box, Richard, like a 1 mile box. And a couple of times it came over my house, not quite over my head, but at like 1 o'clock, not 12, but like 1. And I looked right into its belly. But I'm watching it zigzag like this in this box right over Lockheed and low. Didn't hear a thing. And it wasn't fast. It wasn't like no. But it was acting very strange and, like I said, backtracking on itself, but stayed in this box right above Lockheed. So I watched it for 30 minutes. 30
Wow.
minutes. And I got bored. Now, when it came over, I went in the house. When it came over my head, which it did like twice, maybe 3 times, when it came right over me, triangle, three white lights on each corner, strobing, not navigation, not blue, nothing like that. So anyway, I go in the house. I didn't tape it. I watched it, binoculars, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The next day, I talked about it on the air. And I told everybody, I said, look, it was what it was. And I'm not saying there was anything freaky, but it was pretty interesting that it stayed in this box. And you're not a student pilot flying over Lockheed for a half an hour.
Right.
Yeah, that's not happening. So anyway, I talked about it on the air. The next day, all over the internet, UFOs over Palmdale, UFOs over Skunk Works, UFOs over Lockheed, UFOs over Edwards, with these videos. And they were claiming it was six objects. And it was great. And I'm getting it in my email. I mentioned in the comments, and Jimmy Church was talking. This is what Jimmy Church saw. No, that's not what I saw. And it was now. Did you see the videos? Did you hear the reports about this?
No, I actually thought I did hear something about Palmdale, but I admit that I haven't yet gotten to reading any of the reports, or definitely have not seen any video.
Yeah, and so I went through. Look it up.
What do you think that you saw? I mean, obviously, something you're testing.
No? I think what I saw. Okay, all right, man.
Did you see a triangle?
You're going to get me in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble because you're my friend, and I'm going to answer your question. Okay, they were testing something.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a reasonable guess, frankly.
Yeah, it was testing, and it was dead ass quiet. I mean, like nothing.
Yeah, I think
I heard nothing. I never, even with the binoculars, I didn't get an honest shape, but the lights that were, it was a strobe. Strobe on each corner, and it was flying like the direct, but it was backtracking on itself, right? So it would come. It seemed like this front point was the front of it, right? But then it would like backtrack, but then it would turn, and it would, So I did see it was. So I don't know, man. I don't. And so when it came over, I'm looking right at it, with the binoculars, and it's like this big in the binoculars. I'm looking at it. I could not see an outline.
Well, you can make the argument either way, honestly. Our instinct would be that it's something that we're testing, and why wouldn't it be? I think most people would recognize some of that black world technology is well ahead of what we have officially. I don't think there's any question. On the other hand, I'm deep in the heart of and wrapping up my multi-volume study of USOs. And one thing I can definitely say is that there are countless cases of these objects coming in to check out what's going on a United States nuclear-armed aircraft carrier or a Soviet or Russian battleship. Like, they're interested in what we're doing, and they are drawn. There is no question in my mind. They are drawn to our technological development, and they study it. So you really could go either way with that. My inclination would be probably to agree with you on this one, which is that, we're probably just testing it. And someone might have thought, hey, we got the meteor showers going. Might be a good time to do this. We can kind of meld in with the environment a little bit more.
And there's a lot of testing of stuff out here all the time, and I'll see stuff on the runway. I'm not gonna tell people what I see. That's just uncool. But I do see stuff running up and down the runway doing runway testing. It's obviously, I'm talking about aircraft. I'm not going to allude to, I'm watching flying saucers on the runway. No, during the day they're doing tests, and right now the new B-21 is going through full-on flight testing out here at Edwards and here at Northrop Grumman, where they're building it. So there's a lot of that action. Again, these are people's jobs and careers. I'm not going to sit here and talk about specifics, but what I saw. This is what I wanted to say. When anything else is flying around here, dude, you hear it. You hear it. You hear the wind. You hear the minimum. You hear the wind, right? Yeah. If you're listening to really quiet engines, you still hear the wind. You hear blades. You hear, you hear the takeoff. You hear it. You look up and you hear it. Plus, the other part is with Edwards right here, and of course Northrop Grumman and Air Force Plant 42, which are literally in my backyard. They're flight testing and upgrading aircraft all the time.
That's right.
So they've got F-22s over there, F-35s, upgrading.
You're at testing headquarters, really.
Yeah. So you hear, right?
So I have a question about this craft you saw. So can we hypothesize that it's a triangle, or is that going too far?
I in my mind's eye, I was going triangle.
Yeah,
I'm
you couldn't see a color or an actual physical craft, though, could you, or not?
That's the trippy part for me. I got one of the best, clearest looks at a craft like that, dude. Right above me. At 1,000 feet, and I couldn't hear it, and it stopped. I've got my binoculars, got a cigarette hanging out of my mouth, man. I'm just, I am in the moment, and it stopped, and I'm looking at it, and I couldn't. Trust me, Richard. I want to be able to tell you, I saw this, I saw the bottom, I saw that. I couldn't, and I got a good crack at it, man. For
you
about
only
15
saw the lights.
seconds. Yeah. It's too bright. It's strobing. It's like you're trying to look past a camera flash. You can't see.
I've come to feel like that's part of their camouflage. Like, they can't be completely invisible all the time. They're for whatever reason, those lights are necessary. Elizondo has a theory about that, by the way, in his book. I'm coming back to it. But that the lights on the ends of a triangle are essentially, basically anti-gravitic propulsion, and that you need 3 of them for for like a saucer. You just need 1. For a cigar, you have 2, 1 on each end. For the triangle, you have 3 or sometimes 4, 1 in the center. You have to create a field around the craft using those lights. They're basically not just lights; they're creating a space-time field around the craft, and that might be why it was silent. According to that theory, according to Puthoff's theory, it's doing something to space-time around the craft, and you're just not hearing anything.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's a true explanation, but that's my butchered version of how Lue explained Hal's description.
So like I said, I sat there for 30 minutes watching this, very intrigued, and a couple of I'm listening intentionally, right, for something. And a couple of times I went, oh, okay, phew, I hear engines. right? Like, okay,
Okay.
it's not something crazy. But no, I didn't. I never,
Oh,
I
you did
thought
not at
that I
any
did.
point.
No, 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 no. I watched
Mm.
it for 30 minutes, man. Didn't make a sound, didn't make a peep. And the couple of times I watched it for so long, I'm saying 2, maybe 3 times, it literally just made a beeline straight, right in line with me, right over my patio, and stopped, and then went back. And not, dude.
Here's a question I don't know if
Silent.
anyone has ever really answered fully or satisfactorily, which is like, we know since the 90s and really since the 80s and probably since much earlier than that, we have had breakthroughs, let's say, in creating, maybe reverse engineering, but creating some kind of craft like this. You have some statements that draw some doubt on it, like Davis's notes with Thomas Wilson. Maybe give a little bit of doubt, where they say our progress has been painstakingly slow, but other programs don't seem to have that level of like being stalled out. And I mean, if people like Jim Goodall have talked about this, and a lot of other folks have talked about. I remember listening to video of Bill Uhouse and how the reverse engineering programs were going very successfully in certain ways. So you think, all right, so they've got some kind of mastery of some kind of anti-grav technology for the last 30, 40 years at least. Where are these things in the U.S. military inventory?
Okay, so check this out. I've never said this on the air. I'm going to say it now. You're going to love this about this subject. I'm out with James Fox out at the plant, and we're filming for his documentary. So we're mic'd up. We got his camera crew, and it's, okay. So we're out there, we're filming, and without a permit, by the way. Why we are not in prison right now, that's a whole nother discussion. But we're out there, and I'm talking to. I'm mic'd up, but the guy doesn't see my mic. Okay. And I'm talking to an ex-employee. I'm not going to say, but of one of the plants that are out there. Now, from the fence line, you can see these ginormous buildings, skunk works, man. There's like 4 huge, right, buildings. Air Force Plant 42, ginormous. It's just huge. NASA, it's right there. NASA's hangars are mind-blowing what they can fit in there. And then across the runway is Northrop Grumman. And they have all these engine testing facilities, right? And I turn to the guy and I say this, dude, where does everybody park? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, I don't see any cars. And those are big ass buildings full of people building shit. It's exactly what came out of my mouth. He goes, I don't know. Dude, what? This is all the security, all those guns, the razor wire, the warning signs, penalty of death, right? Everywhere you look, right? Not a car. Right behind us, and we got it on camera. His new film's coming out. Maybe it's in there. Right behind us, you can see the security gate. You can see these dudes in there looking at us. And we're standing in front of these warning signs that say, don't videotape. And anyway, that's another. But all the security, all this stuff, but you don't see any cars.
Well, you wouldn't want those cars to be visible from the outside because someone could get
underground.
Yeah, underground is what I would think.
Yeah. What I'm saying, Richard, is you're looking at all of this infrastructure, right? All of these massive buildings. When you're outside of a Western Electric plant or Samsung or GE, you're looking at 15,000 cars for that shift, right? You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And you're looking at this, and there's not a car. That's it's crazy. I said, where's everybody at? Well, I don't know. Oh, come on, man. So yeah, James asked me the same thing. Because, dude, so what do you think? Underground? I said, look at this.
I would have to think.
Yeah.
Did anyone see? You saw no cars driving anywhere along?
Well, you know what you want to do. What you want to do when you're out there by these gates, and I'll take you and Tracy out there. I take everybody. I'll take you to all the gates, and we'll go up. But you kind of want to be low key.
Oh yeah.
You want to be cool, because if you look in any way, because I've gotten hassled, man. I've gotten the real reports. I told you all about it.
Yeah.
And so if you step out of line, no, you're going to be spoken to. You're going to be spoken to. So you don't want to be counting cars. You know, you don't want to be you don't. That's exactly their job is. It's adversaries. You know, what would stop somebody to just pull up or drive around with a camera, taking pictures for the Russians and sending stuff, you know, in a Dropbox, you know, overseas? What nothing. So yeah, if you're going to go out there and hang out and do stuff, you just kind of want to be. You want to be very American and very touristy. You know what I mean? You want to be on the low key side of things. Friggin' Fox. Okay. You know, I love that guy. I'm sitting there with his sister, Kelly. She's amazing. As you know, she's just amazing. So I'm sitting there with Kelly. James comes up and he's got this black, some things you can't make up. He's got a black Escalade with the windows tinted. That's what he's driving. And he's got his camera guys and his sound guy with a boom mic is sitting there. James is driving. And Kelly and I get out. I'm in my Jeep. Kelly and I are in my Jeep. And James and I are going around and we're talking to people and stuff. Anyway, James goes, okay, man, I'm going to go and shoot the front gate. I go, in that? And I sit down with Kelly on this curb. And I go, you got bail money? And I said, James, you can't be concerned. And he's just doing laps, man, between these two guardhouses. And they're all looking at him. And he's just got a boom mic and a big Sony camera and a black Cadillac Escalade doing laps in front of Air Force Plant 42. Yeah.
How did that turn out for him?
You know, the film's coming out. But Kelly and I were laughing, but it was a nervous laughter. It's like James doesn't care, man. He's a renegade guerrilla. He's out there, you know, he's really pushing the boundaries when it comes to this stuff. He has no fear. Me?
Interesting.
Yeah, me.
He does great work.
Yeah, he does great work. Great work. So, but back to this. So, I took him to these areas out here, and we spent a couple of days going to these different locations, and especially back then, because we did this about 2 years ago. What I know now versus back then, the extent of the testing and the amount of boundaries that are there and access to it, they've pretty much got everything on lockdown. Like you can't really, you can't get a flat tire. If you get a flat tire out there, they're going to come out and tow your car. You can't call AAA. You're on government land. You know what I mean? Right. The road is an easement. But once you step off of the concrete and onto the dirt, you're on Edwards or you're on NASA property.
Remind me not to go there with you.
I've got good tires. But right. But you see the extent of it because it's probably 50 or 100 mile perimeter, I would say. If you go around all of it, yeah, and you just see stuff. just be observant and look up. It's a pretty interesting place. Where do you think that takes us though, when you hear, Ben Rich's comments, or Jim Goodall's great for this kind of stuff too. What I'm seeing in the air, or what we know, is what is it that we're not seeing, and how far out, what we're seeing today was this in development in 1970.
Well, even 10 years ago, I was wondering about this, because it's clear, like, judging on the U.S. military performance over the last several decades, it hasn't really been all that amazing, has it? And certainly the wonder weapons that these would be have never been in evidence. Now, I mean, are they using them as surveillance platforms? Some kind of flying saucer? Maybe that's what they're using them for. But they don't seem to be using them as weapons platforms, and they just have not been in evidence in any. They were not in evidence in Afghanistan, to my knowledge. I'm not aware. They were not in evidence in the U.S. war in Iraq, which did not go well. Neither of those went well. So you have to ask. Now, I mean, I don't think anyone would be surprised to think that the U.S. is not in the business of winning wars. The U.S. is in the business of siphoning money out of the public to pay for a military-industrial complex. I don't think that's even controversial anymore to say that.
Nope.
So, whereas it used to be, but I don't think it is. But still, it begs the question as to what the technology is being used for. If it's not being used for mere geopolitical warfare and things like that, I speculated over 10 years ago, and I don't know if I'm right here, but is it being used for dealing with them, those beings who are not supposed to be here, but they are here? If you are trying to deal with the challenge of highly advanced non-human intelligence that is clearly enveloping our world, with a technology that is just far, far, far beyond what we are using, then would you not presumably use your own most advanced technology in some capacity to deal with that challenge? And I think that still makes the most sense to me. So would you use it to go off world if you could? Well, maybe you would. Would you use that to, I'm not saying engage in warfare with aliens. I don't know that that's what I'm saying, but you would, you think about the Cold War with the US and the Soviet Union, where, and also now, obviously, where you have, US aircraft would certainly invade Soviet and now Russian airspace intentionally to trip radar installations, find out where they are. Like, you play a game of cat and mouse. Would the black budget world, that the breakaway civilization, as I've sometimes called it, would they be engaging in some kind of Cold War with non-human intelligences that are here, or at least with one or some examples of non-human intelligence? I'm just throwing this out as a speculation. I don't really know. But the real big hole in what we know is, like, what is going on with this ultra advanced technology that we've clearly been developing for a long time? Like, it's just not in evidence that I can see in the U.S. arsenal. There's a lot of places for me not to see. I mean, it's not that I have comprehensive view of it. I'm not going to pretend that I do, but still, you'd think that it's been decades. Where is it?
Somebody sent me some documents. I'm sure that you saw them, that they pulled off of social media, that I got the email like 4 days ago. Pages of documents about the Nimitz encounter, that was a test by, and they named the project. I don't have it in front of me, but that it was, they intentionally used the Nimitz group because they were in a war game situation and didn't have any live weapons. And they were testing technology on the carrier group, something that's been put out and discussed and postulated.
You and I had an actual argument on the phone years ago about this.
We did.
Yeah, and that was your position. that it was something that we were testing, and I was just like, no way.
Well,
So-
you know, how do I say this? I'm a military brat, and so I would be angry if that was the case, you know, putting, you know, just freak, but we have done that with the military. Look at the nuclear testing that we did in the 40s and 50s, right in front, you know, had battalions of dudes, right? Just in trenches.
Well, it wouldn't be impossible. It would not be
Wearing
impossible.
sunglasses, right? Wearing sunglasses.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to be 100 yards away. What? You're going to be a mile away. What? You know, it's just like,
No, yeah, exactly.
You know, yeah, and so.
Well,
and
it's a real ethical issue you have to ask. When, again, back to Lue's book, when he was talking about the Roosevelt encounters, those went on for quite some time, and he said, you know, the pilots filed one after another incident report, hoping to get an investigation as to what was screwing around in their airspace while they're doing flight maneuvers. I mean, it's very, very dangerous. This went on for a long and extended period of time, and with the Nimitz encounters as well. You know, that was 2 weeks of over 100. Apparently over 100 UAP encounters that were tracked before the Tic Tac encounter on November 14th. So this, I mean, one could make the argument, yeah, the Navy or some other agency is testing this and they're using our soldiers as guinea pigs. But that's, I mean, officially that is not supposed to happen. That is
well,
not
how would you now let's postulate here. I just used postulate twice in one show.
And then have they been testing this for the last 80 years? That's the other thing. I'm just going to put that out there. We've had aircraft engaging with these exact same types of, it's not like the Tic Tac's anything new. You had Tic Tac. I came across a Tic Tac case from 1936 in the northern parts of Canada, for God's sake. And there have been that planform has been in evidence since the 40s and 50s. These types of lozenge-shaped objects that zoom by our aircraft. Have we been testing this stuff since the 1940s or earlier? I mean, it just seems like a stretch.
Well, how many times have we heard it was a white, silver, aluminum, cigar-shaped craft? How many times? How many times? A million?
More than you could remember. Yeah.
yeah. Right. I've never seen one. You know that I await my first cigar-shaped craft. I've often thought that maybe they were looking at something of a different shape from the side. It could be square.
Yeah, you gotta wonder. Yeah.
But man, cigar-shaped. I'm a little jealous of the people that have seen that because I haven't. I took a picture of a triangle once, but I didn't know it was a triangle when I saw it. It was just a black dot up in the clouds, very high, 50,000 feet. I took it on film. This is 1995, 96. Wow. But I didn't know it was a triangle till later. And I was looking at the pictures and I put my jeweler's loop on it. I was like, what the hell? It's a triangle. What? It was that was in Monterey on the beach. Yeah, I was with a group of friends, 1995. But I haven't seen a triangle craft like this thing that I saw a couple of weeks ago. I can't say that was a triangle. The lights were equilateral, right? They were definitely equally spaced.
Okay. That's interesting to know.
Yeah.
It could have been a triangle.
It could have been. In my mind's eye, I felt
could have
like
been a disc that had a triangular formation of lights.
Could have been. Like I said, it felt triangularly to me.
Yeah, okay.
Is that a word?
It is now.
Triangular.
We're gonna coin that one.
But and the other part about this, which is what is on everybody's mind, the title of Lue's book is Imminent. Now, that's suggestive right there. That's a good title for a book. Very well played. But that's what everybody wants to know. Is this imminent? Is disclosure around the corner? And did you get that from Lue? Is imminent the correct title for the book? Did you get that feeling from it?
I don't know. I didn't really get that title, that disclosure is imminent. I don't. He's certainly a proponent of, I would say, a lot of disclosure. I don't know if he's a proponent of 100%. He's definitely for maximum transparency and much more than what we have. I personally do not think disclosure is imminent. I mean, my God, we're in an election year, for God's sake. Does anyone honestly think that Congress is going to be able to take energy out of the most polarizing election that one can imagine to work on the UAP issue? I seriously doubt it.
Well, wasn't there who was it? Was it Luna's office that said they were going to do the UFO hearing and put it on the calendar for September? And they said, well, yeah, and she said definitely 100% in the fall.
There is some activity brewing behind the scenes. I am aware of some of this myself. So maybe they'll make it happen. I'm just I don't know.
What have you heard?
That I mean, some information will probably be shopped around to appropriate members of the Congress and Senate. Yeah. And but I don't know about hearings. Like, I don't know if they've got anybody lined up. That I don't know. But I do know that there are some people working right now behind the scenes to provide information to members of Congress. That I know.
There's I want your opinion on this. Mm-hmm. I have spoken about this a little bit. I have seen a shift in the action in the area here. When I say that, I'm talking about the Palmdale area, which is nothing but a giant aerospace research facility. Everything is done here. All of it. Everything happens here. Missiles, satellites, aircraft, spacecraft. We have the Mojave Desert spaceport, and everything is going on up there too as well. That's on the other side of Edwards. And that's an incredible facility too as well. So this is, it's this whole area. But what I did see, I've had this house now for 4 years. For the first 2 years that I was here, daily, like all day, every day of the month, transport planes, and a lot of them big jet, big, huge, whatever, the globe trotters or whatever they call those things, globe masters. And sometimes taken off in pairs and sometimes in fours, but all day and all night. I was shooting a lot of video of this because they were huge, right? They would just fly crazy. And so anyway, constant, Richard, and it stopped. And I thought to myself, they're moving something. And the timing of it to me was all of the talk going on in Congress, the NDAA, UAP, backwards engineering, the Wilson Davis document, and then Grush's testimony. I'm giving you names and dates, and this is where these legacy crash retrieval backwards engineering programs are going on. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, why would you show your hand? I'm talking about Grush, right? Why would you show your hand? Because you're telling everybody that's in the Wilson Davis document, we're coming after you, right? You know what I mean? And was I witnessing that? Like, okay, everybody, everything in these hangars is going to Canada or whatever, right? It's just like, we need to empty this stuff. We can't have Congress people showing up here and snooping around. Do you think that could be the case, that we're looking at a shell game right now, and anything that would have been worked on at a location for a very long time now has to be moved to another location because things may be compromised?
I've got to think that there's real fear among those partners in the legacy programs of a possibility of an eminent domain type situation happening to them. Even if they think, okay, we've got our senators, we got our members of Congress in our pocket. They were able to stop this last year. But I mean, if you're one of those guys and you've got a massive flying saucer in a hangar that you don't know how to move, which that's the rumor, you've got to be wondering about this. I've heard people say, well, they don't even want it anymore. This is too much of a hassle for them. They would love to give it up. I have no idea if that's even remotely true, but I've heard someone say that. For me, I'm putting myself in their position. If I'm running Skunk Works, let's just say, or Boeing's division that's got this, and I've got this flying saucer technology, and I don't want to lose it. I want to retain it. What are my options? They have to be legal. Like, this is important to mention. It's like, they can't just do something blatantly illegal, because they're going to get caught if they do something blatantly illegal. They've got to do something that is legally defensible. So could they move an object? Could they change, create another shell game, another shell corporation, and hide it even further? Like, is that a possibility? I'm not good enough to know if that's the answer, but maybe that's something that they'll do. Some kind of legal, corporate, bureaucratic shenanigan that puts another layer of secrecy over it. Maybe they can try to do that. But that's a problem too, because with Grush, as we all remember, Grush last year to Congress is like, I know the exact address where these things are. You put me in a skiff and you're authorized, I can tell you exactly where these things are. So there are physical locations. And I don't know how easy it's going to be. I mean, keep in mind, this entire secrecy evolved with a lot of protection over many generations. So back in the 40s and 50s, there was zero opportunity, zero chance for these programs to be exposed. I mean, you really look back over the history, it just was not ever going to happen. Not in the 70s, not in the 80s, not in the 90s. Not until now are we having an actual public conversation that gives a possibility that we can actually access these things, where we're actually talking about them. Not until Grush had there been a congressional conversation out in the open anyway, where we're talking about non-human craft in possession of these corporations. That had never been done before.
Ever.
No one had said anything like that. So this is all new. And the eminent domain component to this, just to have that put into legalese and a budget and nouns and verbs, right? To have that out front about alien objects and technology, that the government has eminent domain over this, that's a really, really, really major step, isn't it? That's a really big deal. Now, what I understand is that legally,
but for somebody like, let me say this really quick, because that does put a company like Lockheed in jeopardy, especially if you're going to profit off of it. Now the government wants to come in and have eminent domain over something that you've been working on and extracting.
Here's the key. Legally, the key is they're claiming eminent domain over what is alien technology that is essentially a gift to a corporation like Lockheed. So, and this is a very important distinction. So and this is in the wording of the UAP Disclosure Act, which is that they're not saying we're just going to take your stuff that you've been building. No, but if you're getting stuff that doesn't come from here, like, we don't really have a legal precedent for this, do we? Like, there's really no legal precedent to say, how do we adjudicate something where you get this gift from outer space?
A meteorite lands in your backyard, right? Mm-hmm. It's this big. It's full of gold and diamonds, and it's worth $1 billion.
Right.
Who owns it?
I think you do.
Who owns it?
I think if it lands on your property, it's yours, right?
Now that this provision is in the NDAA, does that change things in the United States?
But this is not the same as a meteorite. This is actual manufactured technology. And also, those legacy corporations didn't initially acquire these technologies. We can assume, and we can assume it was probably a military operation that got hold of them and then transferred them.
Right.
So there's a lot of legal maneuvering here. And the point of the wording in the Disclosure Act is simply that the government is choosing to exercise eminent domain over this specific type of actuality of ET technology that is being held by private corporations. I think they're pardon me, they're restricting it to that.
How big of a deal is that? I mean,
very big.
Yeah.
Very big deal. So if it gets passed, which it wasn't a year ago, but if it gets passed now, at least in theory, they could go into Skunk Works, or they could go into Raytheon, or they can go into, I don't know, General Dynamics, General Electric, who knows who's got this, and say, this is our property. We're not necessarily going to take it away from you, but we are going to exercise authority over it. And this is what happened, of course, with when Thomas Wilson was talking to Eric Davis, which, by the way, Davis apparently
said yes.
Yeah, he did, to a closed Facebook group, and it got out. I saw it on Reddit.
Yeah.
All those people who said, oh, yeah, it's all fake. Well, yeah, shows how much they actually knew, which was nothing. They were just spouting off a lot of hot air.
Listen, I said this the other day, and let's kind of close out on this because it's going to take a little bit. Is that Bigelow is at the center of it all.
Yeah.
Damn it.
A lot of it.
Bigelow is at the center of it all. I don't care. You mention a name. It's like Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of separation, right? Right. Just mention a name and you can get it to Bigelow eventually. And just about every, and that goes straight to Osap and Lukatsky and Jay Stratton and Skinwalker and Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff and Kit Green and just pile. It's all right there around Bigelow. And now, when I say something like that, what's your first reaction?
Yes, it's true. He's an incredibly important man. Incredibly important man. He's been driven by this for a minimum 30 years. You know, he funded John Mack, or at least he funded the John Mack MIT conference on abductions back in the early 90s. That was all Robert Bigelow's money. He's been interested in this for the longest time. The work that he sponsored through the National Institute for Discovery Science was groundbreaking. It's extremely important. He's never stopped. He's a guy on a mission. And, he gave that incredible, got some kind of chest cold that I'm still dealing with. Excuse me. Apologize. But he built that amazing 60 Minutes interview back in 2016. I think it was. It was amazing. And, the interview was almost laughing at him. And he's like, no, it's real. They're here. They're
here right now. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't care. He puts it out there, and he's right. Of course he's right. Very important man. I have a lot of respect for him.
And so talking about the Wilson Davis document, with the timeline on that document, where you had Eric Davis in between gigs at Bigelow.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And but Bigelow was always had the ability to attract the best and the brightest. Everybody wanted in on that Bigelow action, man. You were working around other very smart people.
That's right.
That were interested in this phenomena, right? You had Jacques Vallée. There were people that were
they were the invisible college, for sure.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And Eric When the Wilson Davis document, when the conversation happened,
Yeah.
that was that was like the Bigelow. I don't know if it was like the peak of the bell curve, but there was a lot of action going on in 1999, 98, 2000, in and around Bigelow, and Eric Davis was not only a key player back then, but he wanted back in on what was going on, and hence the conversation that he had with then retired Rear Admiral Thomas Wilson.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the behind the scenes decisions to send Davis off for that. Clearly, what you had was so Greer goes with Edgar Mitchell, who's part of the Bigelow group, a few other people to meet with Thomas Wilson in 1997. Wilson reported back. In fact, the person he reported back to was Commander Will Miller, who was also part of the group with Greer and Mitchell. Miller was a Navy commander, so he and Wilson had a rapport. And because I gathered this through some of Greer's statements as well. So Wilson talked with Miller, Miller talked with Greer, and maybe Miller talked with Mitchell too. So somehow word got back to the Bigelow group through Mitchell that Wilson was denied access to this. So they all kind of knew about that. And they were all very interested, but no one had the ability to get access to Wilson until he retired 5 years later in 2002. And they used Oak Shannon, who's referenced in the notes as one of the go-betweens to kind of send Davis. They decided to send Eric Davis along on the mission to basically get an interview out of Thomas Wilson.
When you and I, the first conversation, when you and I opened up that locked email that day, right? And we talked and I so I remember both of us delayed opening the mail. That was the crazy part. I remember you were like, dude, I sat on it for 2 weeks. I said, so did I. It's like, I don't know what.
I didn't even see it. My wife saw it.
Right.
I didn't even look at it. Someone sent it to me anonymously in April of 2019.
So that night, Richard and I are reading the document page for page on the phone, right? And we're just going through it. Mind blown. But Richard, you said one thing to me that I never forgot. I want to remind you. And we're going back and you go, Jimmy, the key here, man, is Oak Shannon. And I didn't know who Oak Shannon was, but you picked it out at that very first phone call that we had the day that we opened up the documents, and you went straight at it. And I never forgot that. I didn't know who Oak Shannon was.
Well, yeah, he's referenced. He went to the McLean BDM meetings sponsored by John Alexander as well back in the Advanced Theoretical Physics group that John Alexander started up, which was another kind of attempt to kind of get into the ultra UFO secret within the Pentagon. And Shannon was involved in that. Grant Cameron, who actually saw those notes in complete form before either of us, also noticed Oak Shannon's name immediately. And that got him.
He sat on those BDM notes for years too, as well.
He sat on them. I saw several pages of those, the Wilson note, the Davis notes, as early as 2006.
No, we talked about that. I'm talking about the BDM, Oak Shannon.
Oh, yes.
The Alexander stuff.
Those are interesting too.
Yeah.
Those were interesting. Yeah.
Grant was the source of both of those, by the way, if you think about that. Isn't that curious? I'm just kind of.
Wait, I talked over you. I did not hear you.
I said Grant was the source of both of those, the BDM Alexander and the Wilson Davis. And
Cameron's had his fingers in a lot of pies over the years. He's actually done a lot of very interesting research. He really, truly has. But as far as we were talking about, basically, I brought up the whole Wilson thing just to point out that Thomas Wilson back then was denied access to this reverse engineering program. And he felt, rightly or wrongly, but he felt that due to his position within the DIA, that he ought to have had access of or supervisory oversight of this program. And they basically told him to go take a hike. And if you got a problem with it, go try to complain and see how far that gets you. And he did, and he was threatened with his career, and we know all of that. So the problem is, getting back to the UAP Disclosure Act and the eminent domain feature of that, this is very, very significant because, as Wilson found out over 25 years ago, you don't play with these guys. Like they are protected to the max. And so the real question is, would a congressional act, if it gets signed into law, would that override? Who knows what kinds of classified laws are there? Are there such things as classified laws that protect these
corporation?
technologies? I mean, I don't really know.
Well, they certainly seem to be pretty cocky about it. You know, they're really cocky. You know, they told, well, dude, fly back to Washington, yell at whoever you want. We don't give a shit.
Oh yeah. They said that to Wilson. Absolutely.
Yeah, they said that to Wilson. And you know, there was one other line in there. And we can assume this is Lockheed and Skunk Works that we're talking about. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. But they said, we got a craft. We think it can fly. We just can't fly. You want to see it? Come on, man. We'll show it to you. That's pretty cocky. It's like, man, there's nothing you can do to us, man. No matter, you're cutting the checks, but that doesn't give you the right. And you can go to the White House. Go ahead.
Those notes, I mean, they're obviously real. They're obviously authentic, but they don't answer all of our questions. And they raise a lot of other questions. It's like, okay, so this program has said that they have had no success. Were they telling Wilson the truth?
Right.
That's a question. Like, I don't doubt that Wilson told Davis mostly what he probably held things back as well, but in fact, we know he did. But let's assume he was telling Davis the truth within the privacy of that car. And Davis, I don't think there's any reason to think that he wasn't being scrupulously truthful in writing the notes down. But that doesn't mean that they were telling Wilson the truth. I mean, we really have no way of knowing. So have they had painfully slow progress? Maybe that particular craft, they have not had success. Have they had success elsewhere in other areas? You know, where you have there's Bob Lazar. You know, he's much earlier. He's back in the 1980s. There's Bill Uhouse, who's earlier still. Are they just full of it?
Like, doesn't Lukatsky talk about being on board?
Does who?
Lukatsky, doesn't he talk about
being on board? I don't remember. I don't remember in his book. Did he do that?
Yeah, I think so.
Being on board a craft?
So. I think so. I believe so.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they've seen. I think a lot of that group has probably encountered an alien craft. Whether they're able to do anything with it, I don't have the slightest idea.
Okay, when's the book coming out? You know, and by the way, Richard Dolan Members, everybody. Richard used to. I'm going to do this today for Richard. Richard used to take these shows and put them on Richard Dolan Members exclusively for his team, and we would always do that. You haven't asked me the last few times, man. My feelings are hurt.
You have these on YouTube now, don't you?
Yeah, but I sent you, but I give you the versions without the commercials.
So
and
you
everything.
worked very hard. I don't want to do that to you. I feel like I'm imposing on you. Honestly, you were doing me a great favor, and by cutting the commercials out, that was amazing. I just didn't want to do that to you, and since I know you've got them on YouTube, I just embed them.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
That's good.
So, when's the book coming out?
It's going to be in 3 volumes.
Jesus Christ! You told me it was going to be 2. Well, you said 1 and then 2. I've got a lot of illustrations, Jimmy, and so I'm going to extend. Now you're saying it's going to be 3.
Well,
Is
it's
it
well
done
over.
and you're
It'll be
cutting? Is it done and you're cutting it into 3? Just tell me that's the
kind of
case.
pretty much done. It's over 1,000 pages.
Good Lord.
I know, it's ridiculous. How dare I do all that? So I have cases going right up through 2024. I've got cases right up into this year. I've got quite a few from 2023. Quite a few. Some good ones too. I have a fantastic illustrator. His name is Alan Levine. He has done illustrations for 160 of the cases. It keeps going up. I think I haven't done a full count again, but 630, maybe 640 USO cases that I have collected. Alan has done an enormous number of really cool illustrations. They look amazing. But in addition to that, I have maps galore. I have the introduction alone is, I think, 70 pages. As is right now. It's so long because I've done a statistical analysis. So what I ended up doing, the reason this is taking so long is that I had all of the cases pretty much written up this last spring. They were done. Although now I'm adding more. I just found a couple of sources and it's like, I have to hit my forehead and go like, okay, I can't not work with these cases. So I am actually including a few more. I added a few more today. But basically, I mean, it's ridiculous. But what I really ended up doing that took so many months of my time, it was killing me, but I had to do it, was to do a data, like a statistical breakdown of all of my cases. So just imagine, I've never done a spreadsheet before, ever. I'd never made a spreadsheet. I'm a complete novice. So I now have a spreadsheet of all 630 or so cases, each with like 20 or so data points. So it's like this massive spreadsheet, data points, including things like, well, all right, the date of the event, and then the location, what body of water it took place in. I've got them broken down into different places: Northern Atlantic, Northwest Atlantic, a lake, a North American lake, and all of these types of data. Was it a daytime or a nighttime? That's an interesting one right there. What shape was the craft? I've got all the different shapes listed. What did the craft do? Was it under the water? Did it enter the water? Did it emerge from the water? Was it on the water? Did it emerge from the surface? I have all of those broken down. How many witnesses were there? Was it 1? Was it 2 to 10? Was it 10 plus? What was the proximity of the witness? Where was the witness? Were they on shore? Were they on the ocean? Was there a potential interest by this object in the witness? And that's a subjective question, but I try to really answer that. Like, did the object seem to be interested in the witness? And then anything else, like, was there electromagnetic interference? Was there missing time? There are some missing time cases associated with these USOs. And on and on. I've got all these data points. So what I ended up doing is, this took months, but I have done like a not bad level of statistical analysis of the data that I put in there painstakingly. It was so tedious. Honestly, I hated doing it, but I realized I had to do it. A lot of this was my wife Tracy's suggestion. And I realized, like, she was right. Like, there's so much information here.
You have to get it organized.
It had to be organized. And in fact, it was the act of organizing it that allowed me to notice certain very interesting patterns in this phenomenon that I don't think I would have ever noticed otherwise, which I should talk about. The other thing that I've done is, the last couple of months, is I've created an evidence rating. Not a case rating. That's too difficult. But the quality of the evidence itself, and I have created a whole series of metrics for that, and that actually took a lot of time, but I've done that too. But anyway, there are patterns involved here that tell me that the information I'm getting is probably good. So, for example, day versus night. It's a simple little metric. Did the sighting happen when the sun was up, where it was daytime, or did it happen at night? I couldn't really break it down to like, was it at 3 a.m? Was it at 1:30? That's too much. So just daytime or night. But what's interesting in that is I noticed like up to about 1970, actually up to 1968 to be exact, the majority of cases, a slight majority, but a definite majority, occurred in the daytime.
Mm.
Now keep in mind, I'm just working off of my data sample, and all I'm trying to do is pull in what I think are the best of the USO cases I could find. I left a lot out, by the way. I left a USO case out if it was too threadbare, if I didn't have confidence in it, if there just wasn't enough for me to go on. I didn't include it. So it had to be some substance to it. So anyway, up until 1968, let's say 55% of the cases occurred during the daytime. After 1968, the number is about 75% occurred at night. So it's a rather dramatic change. Yes. Not only that, it gets better. If you separate from military to non-military cases, it's quite dramatic. So even in the early period, military cases predominantly happened at night. So whereas civilians, so if it was a civilian case, I can't remember now, but it would be like almost a 60% chance that it would happen in the daytime. Whereas military in those early years, 2/3 of them were at night. After 1968, a full 90% of all the military cases seem to have occurred at night. 9 out of 10. It's almost like incredible. And so that tells me a couple of things. A, there seems to be a change of behavior in these objects after the late 60s for some reason. And B, they seem to be able to distinguish military from non-military craft because the behavior is different.
Yeah, that would make that. I think that's a big.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a really big deal.
Yeah, and it's like we
to
kind of know that they're intelligent, but this really seems to indicate definite intelligence here. Like
yeah. The difference between an oil tanker and an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Or a submarine, for instance. A submarine would also come into play.
Yeah, the day versus night thing, it's really quite stark. And I will tell you, when I was writing the cases out and researching them, I did not notice that pattern whatsoever. It was only after I had this massive spreadsheet and I'm looking at it and I can see it much more easily, much more clearly. So that was a good one. Now, another thing I noticed is a correlation of missing time cases with electromagnetic interference. So it's not like every time, like both of those are a minority of cases. Like of all of the USO cases, I'm trying to remember, I think like 8%, or maybe a little more than that, maybe 10% had some kind of EM interference in some way or another. But of all of those, an inordinately large number of those were accompanied by missing time.
Now, okay, one last question, and then we'll say goodnight. By the way, I've got to be up early. I've got to head to Alaska in the morning, and you're busy. But Atlantic or Pacific? Now, I know you're looking at all the bodies of water around the world, but between those two oceans, where's the most action?
They're both quite active. We must keep in mind that Americans are way better at reporting these things than any other group. So Americans dominate. Doesn't mean that there aren't other nationalities. They all report them. This is global. But in fact, the Atlantic has more. And particularly, Puerto Rico is king for this. And by the way, the Channel Islands, Catalina Island, big time activity. Yeah. Absolutely. Malibu, everything in that area, very heavy activity. That is a major hotspot. There is no question about it. But in my view, there is no hotspot more intense than Puerto Rico. The cases there, and particularly the Puerto Rico Trench, which is just north of that island. A lot of crazy stuff going on over there. But the entire southeastern U.S. seaboard, Florida, Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, It's extreme. In fact, going all the way up, even the eastern seaboard up to Canada, Newfoundland, a lot of activity up there. So I would say that's actually underreported. Like, we all talk about Catalina Island, rightly so. We all talk about Puerto Rico, but there's not much of a recognition that the whole U.S. northeastern corridor going into Canada is quite active as well. But that doesn't, other regions. I'm going through a lot of Russian sources again right now. And you go up north in places like the Barents Sea, which is just remote, quite active. The Baltic Sea is quite active.
Yeah.
Coast off South America, off Brazil, it's quite active.
So 1,000 pages. Are you gonna do the audiobook?
Yes, I am going to.
1,000 pages. Yeah, you got your work.
I've been looking, like, can I clone my voice in a good way that will work for people? And you can't do it, like, not with an Amazon Kindle. I've looked into this. Amazon, they're not letting me do a clone of my voice. So I've got to read the damn thing.
Yeah. It's better that way anyway.
It will be better. It will be better. I'll just do it.
How often?
I didn't ask you a question as to when.
When is it coming out?
It's going to come out in 3 successive volumes. I can't release them all at once. It's too much. It'll kill me.
Okay.
So the first one will come out, I do think, God, I hate putting myself out online to this, but I'm thinking in the fall. I think the first one can come out in this fall. So soon, maybe a month or two.
Okay, because it's September. You know that.
I know. Believe me, this is killing me. But
I know.
Look, the thing I'm not going to do, I'm not going to rush this because I have to hit some deadline. It will get done when it's done. Once the first one's done, I can confidently say that the 2 successive ones will come out shortly after that.
And how often, real quick, and again, thank you. Give my best to Tracy. What nights do you go live on YouTube?
I usually will release my show on Tuesday nights.
Tuesday nights?
I just did one last night. I had Michael Schratt on as a guest. I love Michael Schratt.
Yeah, he's great.
He was fantastic. So we did a show last night.
Thank you so much, Richard. Please just work a little harder. All right.
I know. I've been slacking off. I was watching Friends before we did this. So there you go.
You're going to get all bingy on that. You're going to slack off. All the best, man. And I'll talk to you when I get back from Alaska. Okay. All the best to Tracy, and
have a great time.
Go watch John Noble. Anna Torv, man. Anna Torv.
John Noble's a genius.
I'll talk to you. All right. Thank you, Richard. Have a great night. Perfect show. Thank you so much. Richard Dolan did a little overtime there. It's very important to get this the book out. And of course, Richard Dolan Members, all the information that you need is right there. The links are below. I will see everybody when I get back. I think the next show is going to be on Monday the 15th, Monday the 16th, whatever that day is. But there you go. Have a great, safe night. Enjoy your week. Go back, Lee Tepe. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go back, Lee Tepe.